ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Spre țărul pe drum știut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. E pentru că pe lume partidul s-a dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce-nseamnă ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. самых окраин, южный город до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Страна моя родная, слава ей, слава ей, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой родился человек. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой родился человек. За столом никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Страна моя родная, слава ей, слава ей. Весенний ветер веет, каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Страна моя родная, слава ей, слава ей, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой родился человек. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой родился человек.
и без оплат. И нас не согреет треск речей под барабанный раскат. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы, извините, что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. In the cities, ready in der Arbeiter Einheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Ready in der Arbeiter Einheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Pod słońcem rasti jasna dzieci, rasti i cvietaj zemljo radnih ljudi i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napuči i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije простяк, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжается бой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Hello, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 3rd of March, 2026, and here we are with the live stream looking at the latest from the war between the USA and its gaggle of imperialist abominations, junior abominations, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And are going to be looking at some of the latest from there, but also some of the deeper trends that the war has revealed, including the nature of the comprador regimes in West Asia, amongst other things. So be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. We are live on YouTube, X, Twitch, Rumble, and Substack. So those are the places you can find us tonight and most nights, in fact. So going to be taking some of your questions later on in the program, but first I'll get to what we're going to start off with in terms of the discussion tonight, which is the how to understand the role played by the Gulf tyrannies, shall we say, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and more broadly, some of the countries in the West Asian region, including some of the potentially more powerful ones that could contest the domination exercised by U.S. imperialism over West Asia over for the last 3 decades, but failed to do so. Thinking specifically in the case of the more powerful states, looking at Egypt and Turkey. So what we're going to be doing is looking at the how to understand all of this in the context of imperialism and where these countries fit in the US-led global imperialist system, and why the places like the UAE and Qatar and certain places in Saudi Arabia coming under attack is tremendously important. Now, there was a delusion in some circles, in some so-called multipolarist circles, that due to the fact that the UAE and at some points Saudi Arabia, even though that turned out to be a rather shaky relationship, were going to be part of BRICS. The UAE is part of BRICS, and the Saudis are sort of joined it. And this led some to speculate that these were going to defect from the US camp. Now, nothing could be further from the truth as time has gone on. It has been revealed that these regimes were never going to leave the Anglo-American imperialist camp. They cannot escape their origin points. And it doesn't matter how many times the Americans quite literally spit in their faces, the likes of the UAE can't defect. And neither can the regimes in Ankara and Cairo either, but for slightly different reasons. And certainly the monarchical, the Anglo-American monarchical regime in Jordan can't defect and can't move into another camp for reasons we will go into. So the regimes in this part of the world, these regions, current subordination to finance capital is quite a deliberate creation of largely in terms of the Gulf states, the British, and their construction of neo-colonial states when they were compelled to withdraw from direct control over the various statelets that emerged from the winding down of the directly controlled British Empire. Now, if you look at the data as to who the biggest investors are in any particular country, you can see where really who is going to be calling the shots. So, for instance, the UAE, you look at who the biggest sources of foreign direct investment are, and those are Britain itself, old perfidious Albion, India, interestingly enough, the US, of course, and the French. And this tells you like an awful lot about what the UAE is. It's not only a source of oil and gas, of course, but also it's a key node through which capital from the big imperialist powers is invested and then circulated again. Now, you then have to look at, well, okay, so it's got these investors that are largely from the imperialist countries, but then again, you also then look at who holds its debt. Now, the debts of the UAE are held by British, US, and Japanese financial institutions, and this arrangement descends directly from its status as a British protectorate from the old trucial state system that was created to guarantee British imperialist control of Gulf shipping lanes. And again, this is something which, again, still exists. The British role here is still very significant in terms of their finance role and their role of owning UAE debt. But the control of the shipping lanes, well, for a while it passed the United States. More on this later on. So you see with the UAE, which is this key country in the Gulf region, that it is still something which is largely invested in by its old imperial master. Its debt is held by banks in the City of London and American and Japanese financial institutions. It's a creation of imperialism. It remains a creation and a servant of imperialism. So it's a place where imperialism gets its some of its oil and gas from, but also it serves as a offshore banking facility, basically. So slightly bigger country immediately to the west and the north is, of course, Saudi Arabia. Now, they have at least $274 billion worth of debt, which is held by US, European, principally French, Dutch, and Luxembourg banks, and Japanese banks. So Saudi debt is controlled by the traditional imperialist powers. Now, Mohammed bin Salman, currently shifting uneasily inside his robes as things get a little hot around Riyadh, had this, or was fronting up this so-called Vision 2030, which is about diversification of the Saudi economy away from oil production. And this relies almost entirely on foreign direct investment from the traditional centers of imperialism. Now, some of the big investors in this are, of course, the US, the British, and also the Dutch are involved. There's a small French investment, but principally this is a Anglo-American venture still to this day. Now, there is, of course, significant oil trade between Saudi Arabia and China, but the Chinese role in both Saudi and the UAE is very marginal. Now, if you turn to a state which is largely overlooked, and it's certainly not talked about very much inside the British bourgeois press, but if you look at like Jordan, again, this is another case of a nation which hasn't actually escaped its origins as a creation of British imperialism. Most of their debt is either owned by British and US imperialism, or it's owned by the Saudis and the UAE, so two creations of imperialism. So also like the biggest investors in Jordan remain other Arab nations, principally the Gulf states, and then behind them comes the US and the British. So this is again, like, shouldn't be any surprise that none of these nations are overly enthusiastic about steering an independent course. They just simply they weren't set up to do that, and they're absolutely dependent on capital flows from the imperial core. Now, Egypt's an interesting one because, of course, this is the country that was famous for the presidency of Gamal Abdel Nasser, one of the great leaders in the 20th century of Arab nationalism, and one of the big opponents of, or successful opponents of British imperialism, an opponent of the Zionist regime, and an opponent of US imperialism. Now, with Nasser's passing away at too early an age, and the leadership passing to Anwar Sadat, there was, of course, a defection from the non-aligned or / sort of aligned with the Soviet Union group to Egypt being something that was purely aligned as a comprador-run state with US imperialism. Now, interestingly enough, after the trouble with the so-called Arab Spring and the cycling through various different governments, it, of course, then emerged under the leadership of General Sisi. But the Egyptian state is something which is still, despite its application for BRICS membership, something which is very much under the control of, again, the imperialists. For instance, Egyptian debt amounts to 90% of GDP, and has been subject to several IMF so-called structural adjustment programs that have been forced on Egypt. Well, I don't think they only had to force Sisi or his predecessors to do to adopt these, but they're there. They are there to facilitate the privatization of state assets in order to make Egyptian debt something which is still seen as being a viable investment vehicle. And again, that the level of penetration of the Egyptian economy by imperialism is again something that should tell us everything we need to know about why is it that the state that was once the home of one of the homes of Arab nationalism is almost completely capitulated before the feet of imperialism. It comes down to capital flows, and it comes down to debt ownership being two of the biggest elements to analyze here. Now, the other interesting one here is the Turkish state has under Erdogan something of like imperial ambitions of its own to an extent, but again has a gigantic amount of external debt, which is held not just by internal investments in the Turkish bourgeoisie, but by international financial institutions, including, of course, those in originating in New York and the City of London, and also the EU. The Turkish economy is very integrated with the European Union, despite the fact that they've been holding EU membership out to the Turks for many decades, and it's never quite been given to them. But they're still integrated into European system to a large extent. Sorry about that brief technical hiccup. So you see here from the fact that, like, when people say, well, why are the even the bigger nations such as the Egyptians, such as the Turks, still don't never resist the Americans for all the revulsion of at American and Israeli actions that exist amongst the population. Why is it that the Turks, for all that Erdogan mouths off about the great pride of the Turkish nation and indulges in neo-Ottoman fantasies, why is it that Turkey, the avowed defender of the Muslims, the defender of the Palestinians, will never seriously defy US imperialism? It's because if they did, then that would lead the Turkish economy into an almost immediate crisis because of US imperialist control and European control over Turkish debt and over access to funds to service that debt, and over the integration of the Turkish economy with the EU market. So all of those provide powerful systems of leverage over whoever would be in charge of Turkey. Now, particularly for somebody as duplicitous and corrupt as Erdogan, who should never be trusted for more than 5 seconds. But even if he wasn't there, even if it was somebody else, the level of penetration by imperialist capital into Turkey shows us just very well, like Turkish bourgeois politicians are never going to rebel against the imperialists. They're owned by them, quite literally in this case. So you then look at like somewhere like Lebanon, which is again been, of course, in the news due to the fact that Hezbollah has very much entered the war against Israel. And you look at like why the Lebanese bourgeois remains so absolutely feeble and pathetic and prostrate before imperialism. Well, again, like imperialism controls Lebanese debt. They make a lot of foreign direct investment in Lebanon. And there's a whole class of compradors in Lebanon, by far they're far from the only nation who are subject to the actions, this kind of action. But there's a whole class of compradors in nations like Lebanon who make their money doing business with the providers of foreign direct investment. And to them, it doesn't matter how debased, how corroded, how humiliated Lebanon is by imperialism and by imperialism's agents in the form of Israel, as long as they keep getting to do business. And this is how the neocolonial system works. It is designed to put a certain amount of capital into the West Asian region, but also extract an awful lot more out again. And this is the way that the system works. And the change that could be brought here by the Iranian strikes on like the UAE and Qatar in particular, it could mean that the UAE is terminally damaged. Could mean that Qatar is terminally damaged. Their reputation and their ability to remain as this sort of hub of finance for imperialism is going to be called into question after this. So, just moving here. So, when people ask the question of like, well, how do they maintain their control? Well, this is how. Like as you're seeing with the Iranian strikes against the U.S. imperialists, like the actual military level of the imperial presence in West Asia isn't actually that huge. Like it's been revealed that it's quite limited very quickly by Iran, but the fact that like all of these economies are so integrated into the American-led system, so bound up with it, so dependent upon the class that rules them is dependent upon capital being imported and then exported again. This is the kind of that's the kind of like feeble state that is produced by such a system. Right. Okay. Albert in the chat says you also have to consider the fortune that the Erdogan family has chiseled out for themselves. Well, yes, that's true. That's always the case with the comprador leaders. They always, of course, make sure that they fill their own bank accounts. That's just a part of the system there. Somebody's on Twitch says, you're a little off. The current Iranian regime has been at war with the United States since November the 4th, 1979. Well, yes, that's true. I mean, in fact, I have said that on numerous occasions. But day 4 of this current iteration of the war, shall we say. So let's just go through some messages in the chat. So we've got, and do some greetings. So we have Jenny, we have Mogman Dog, we have Dr. MJS, we have Spakalos on Twitch, we have Hillside Coda, we have Sophia, we have CE1910, we have Ogas Cybernetics, we have Walter, we have Nikki in Athens, we have Robeson in Indonesia, we have Pavel who asks, hi Alex, logic of imperialism dictates that EU subcontractors support the war against Iran. Do you see a potential where the energy crisis forces EU to concede on Ukraine for Russian gas? It's an interesting point. To a certain extent, this has already happened, or it already looks like it might happen. There's a story in the Financial Times this morning about the EU needing to urgently find other sources of gas due to the fact that the Qataris have stopped producing, and therefore they need an urgent solution, because otherwise the price is going to go through the roof and they'll risk severe social unrest if people can't pay their fucking bills. So that's already created a problem for the European Union. Will they now openly like buy Russian gas and maybe oil? My guess would be what will end up happening is a farce, which is that they'll like buy Russian gas at a markup from somebody else, and that somebody else could be the Turks. It could come through like the Turk stream, gas hub, but they won't openly acknowledge that they are violating their own sanctions. It's like with the year upon year of like sanctions busting that the Europeans and others have engaged in, busting sanctions that they've imposed on the Russians themselves by just buying rebranded Russian oil. Like for years, they were like buying it from the Indians. So the Indians would import Russian oil at a heavy discount, then slap another label on it, and then send it off to like the EU under the label of Indian oil. Again, like a lot of the stuff that goes on with the sanctions busting is just a farce. Now, could we reach a point where there is a collapse in like gas and oil exports from West Asia that forces the European countries to like openly go on bended knee to the Russians? It's possible, but the war would need to go on for a lot longer, and there would not need to be a lot more attacks on like oil and gas infrastructure to make that happen. At the moment, I think what the European leaders would favour is like a face-saving farce, whereby they pay an awful lot of money for relabeled Russian energy products and then claim they're buying it from somewhere else. Russians will laugh, and the farce will continue. We'll see how bad the crisis gets, basically, but they won't openly do it at this stage. Though it is interesting that story turned up in the Financial Times this morning, that they were they were actually discussing buying more Russian oil and gas. And my guess will be that the Ukraine war fanatics in the European system will then start screaming about that. Be interesting to see what the British do. Now, bear in mind, the British, of course, have been the most fanatical in terms of pursuing the Russian war. But of course, never underestimate the hypocrisy, duplicity, and double dealing that the British engage in. If they think that their own system is in a significant amount of trouble unless they get a large infusion of oil and gas, they'll go running to the Russians themselves, one way or the other. Again, they'll do it covertly. They'll do it whilst trying to maintain the Ukraine war, but they will do it if the situation gets severe enough where they're threatened with domestic consequences for the war in West Asia. All right, so good evening to Davey and Speedy Bozo and Michael McGoldrick and Defiance and Anthony in Prague, who says it's difficult to know what, with all the imperialist propaganda flying around, but does Iran still have control of their airspace? It would seem so at this stage. Again, very difficult to know exactly what is going on at any given time. But given that the US is still gets fighter jets shot down, or is getting fighter jets shot down, apparently by those 3 that got shot down just like yesterday morning, were shot down by not by Iranian air defense, but by an Iranian Air Force jets. And also that, according to like most credible reports, most of like what the Americans and the Israelis are firing into Iran isn't actually like missiles from like planes over the skies of Iran. It's missiles fired from ships and missiles fired from aircraft that are immediately outside of Iranian airspace. So they're still not apparently flying all the way in to Iranian airspace. They're sitting some way outside of it, firing their munitions and retreating again. And the Americans and the Israelis are still trying to suppress the Iranian air defense and haven't succeeded so far. So they're still being very cautious about going into Iranian airspace, because if they do that and the air defense is active, and there was a story just before I came on the air tonight about the fact that there'd been another, I think there's an F-15 plane shot down by the Iranians, then again it shows that the not only is the Iranian air defense still active, but it has the capability of shooting down American aircraft. And if you factor into that also the potential effects of like the loss of the powerful radar systems that the Americans had installed in the region, that will affect the combat capability of their aircraft, then I think they're going to remain cautious and remain outside Iran. And now, bear in mind the tactic that the US seems to be using so far is to bomb civilian areas, bomb soft targets, and engage in acts of like mass terror against the Iranian civilian population. So they can do that just by firing in from quite some distance away. Hello to Ogar Cybernetics, Chris Rogers in Hong Kong, Nush82, Robert Svoronich in New York. Nush82 says, can we address what role China has in this conflict? If the Chinese leadership doesn't understand that this is implicit aggression against them, they're incredibly naive. Oh, they understand it. I think on this one they do, which is why they've been, according to not just sort of fringe Twitter reports from fairly credible reporting about the role that the Chinese are playing in this, which is that they are supplying the Iranians with like satellite data and up to the moment like satellite imagery, helping the Iranians to target US positions. And this is should be no surprise, as Nush 82's question implies. This is something which is targeted against them. Of course it is. I've explained before that this move is not just against Iran. It is a move by long planned move by US imperialism. If they can secure the destruction of the Islamic Republic, then they will move into move into the space formerly occupied by the Islamic Republic and use their ability to project force into there to put further pressure and make more trouble for both China and Russia. So that's why the Chinese are supplying so much intelligence and support to the Iranians in this. And also it's why they are, I think, probably supplying more than intelligence support. They probably are supplying war material. There's all kinds of stories about the exact level of involvement of the Chinese, but I think that it's fair to say that the involvement that they have is far more than they've had, say, in the Russian war. They've been supplying a lot in the Russian war, but I think that the Chinese are taking a much more active role in supporting Iran, and in order, it is in their interests to keep the Iranians supplied and in the fight. In terms of if the Iranians need any assistance producing new missiles, for instance, my guess would be that the Chinese might have, so we say, ways to supply them with component parts to enable them to do that. The Chinese have an interest in bogging the Americans down and having them revealed to be the paper tigers that they are, because essentially this is all part of an American move to create as much trouble for China as possible, with a view to later bogging the Chinese down in a sort of version of the Ukraine war, but fought over Taiwan using Taiwanese, possibly Japanese and Filipino, maybe even Australian proxy forces. Again, the American plan was never to fight China themselves toe to toe. It was to get other people to do that, and then America hangs around in the background supplying possibly naval support, but quartermastering perhaps some of the armies, but not going toe to toe with the Chinese, but hiding behind others. However, so therefore it's in China's interests to see the US ground down as far as possible. Now, again, this war has already gone very, very wrong from the US point of view, because Trump, the idiot, thought that he was getting a 24-hour window of victory. And in the end, he's landed himself in a nasty, ever-increasing war with a country that has the ability to fight this for many months. Trump gave a sort of rambling and ludicrous press conference earlier on where he insisted then in follow-up Truth Social posts about how we have the most biggest and the most glorious reserves of ammunition that anybody has ever seen in the world. There's no problem there. Meaning that there is a problem there, and Trump is just basically trying to bullshit his way through it. It's like Trump assuring you, if you were buying a condominium off him, that that weird smell would go away, and that the damp on the wall was actually an artistic feature. Not a man known for giving a truthful account of flaws. Trump also came out with this absolutely ludicrous idea that he was going to order the U.S. Navy to escort oil tankers out of the Straits of Hormuz, which have been, of course, through the Straits of Hormuz, which have been closed by the IRGC under threat of missile fire against oil tankers. And indeed, some oil tankers have already been hit. I believe it's at least 4 been hit to the point where the crews had to abandon them. So now Trump says, I'm going to send in the U.S. Navy to escort those oil tankers out of the Persian Gulf. My guess is that this will not happen because, again, like this just sounds like something Trump has pulled out of his posterior. Because remember, this didn't work when the U.S. tried something similar in their operations against Ansar Allah. That didn't actually solve the problem at all. In fact, it just made the U.S. ships targets. Now, Ansar Allah did, it would seem, shoot down some U.S. aircraft and cause a certain amount of damage to U.S. shipping, now U.S. naval ships. Now, bear in mind that the Iranians apparently have anti-ship missiles, some apparently supplied by the Chinese, that could do a lot of damage to American naval ships. And I think that the US naval commanders probably know that. So are they really going to want to escort very slow moving oil tankers out of the Persian Gulf through the Straits of Hormuz with the Iranians firing anti-ship missiles, not just at the oil tankers, but at the naval vessels? They've already fired at least 8 ballistic missiles at the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, forcing it to retreat further and further away into the Indian Ocean. So how is this idea going to work exactly? And if the US can't actually pull its naval vessels into docks in the Gulf region, then where are these vessels going to dock for like resupply? Even assuming they even get through this job. So this doesn't work. This is a fantasy that Trump has cooked up in his head, along with the idea that the US is now going to become an insurer for all of these naval vessels, all of these oil tankers that perhaps can't get insurance through Lloyd's of London, or the insurance premiums have gone too high, that you're going to get Trump insurance. Again, like something which I don't think will happen in the way that he wants, or will not happen at all. Right, okay. So, who else have we got here? Hello to Spark Thistle in Bristol. What do I think of Brian Berletich? Does some very good analysis. He's largely been correct about the plans of imperialism for Iran. I would say his limitation is that he doesn't understand the historic role of the masses in politics, and he doesn't seem to have an appreciation for resistance movements born out of the masses. He only seems to sort of understand state-to-state stuff, which is, of course, a limitation on anybody's politics. But generally, like, you know, when it comes to like American imperialism, he is, of course, at least one of those who were consistently correct about Trump's intentions. Others, such as the Duran clowns, were, of course, taken in by Trump's bullshit about being the president of peace. Okay. So, hello to Ben Horst from Toronto. Why I Ain't Cool over there on Twitch. Who else we got here? Cataclysm 123 from Blackburn, Lancashire. Mushkin from Gloucestershire, Albert, John Crowfeather, Comrade Jawad, CE 1910 from Gothenburg, Alex Moore. Hello to you up there in Fife, fellow resident of the land of the Scots. Walter Keating says, the war has been an astonishing revelation that can no longer be denied. You mean the propaganda about Iran we've been fed all these years is BS? Well, there's, I think you're being layering on the irony there, or so should I say the sarcasm? But that is of course, the correct observation. Right, let's have a look here. Walter asks, seriously, do we have the dumbest, most self-interested, short-sighted ruling class in history? Well, they're always dumber on the downward slope. That's something that's very true. But I would say that it's important not to mistake desperation for stupidity. I mean, the war in Iran was always going to come one way or the other. Imperialism absolutely needed it. They've been clear about it since the days of the old project for the new American century, that they wanted this to happen, that they needed it to. And so it was, again, this was always going to come along. It was just a question of how, in what form did the war come about. It turned out like that Trump managed to guarantee it would come about in the most destructive way possible for US imperialism itself. So thank you for that one, Donald. It's not that some of these people are incredibly stupid. It's just that all of the options that are in front of them are incredibly poor. Again, they would be damned if they did, damned if they didn't. If they didn't try and take on and destroy Iran, they would be left with even more difficult options in the form of the Russians and the Chinese. So they're obliged to go after what they imagine is the easier target, and it turned out to be exactly the opposite. They are a very uneasy target. Hello to Irish Partisan, who says glory to the axis of resistance. Just going through any interesting comments here. Almir says, I believe Iran will survive this, but I wonder what kind of deal they will accept to end hostilities. Well, it's going to be an interesting one. They seem to have a clear plan that they're working towards and an objective in mind, and they'll be able to keep going longer than the US at this stage. But again, it raises the question of like, well, what kind of deal can be reached? And we don't know at this stage. Callum Roche says, I saw Jody Bra with David Miller the other day. They touched on, but didn't really get into their difference on American imperialism versus Pax Judaica. I wonder if you had anything to add to it. Funny you should mention that. Special video coming tomorrow on the role of Israel. So what role Israel truly plays. Or I think I'm just spitballing on the title at the moment. I'm thinking of calling it like, is this a war for Israel? Because the question does need to be addressed. So tomorrow on the channel, that question will be covered in quite some detail. There's Trump on the stream. No, I'm very busy putting a black marker through all of those mentions of this guy called Donald J. Rump in the Epstein files. Don't know who that guy is. Got to cross him out. Right. Bruce Albert says Trump has zero idea about naval operations. Trump has watched Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick no less than 47 times. He knows everything about naval operations. Hello to Spurious Furious from Vancouver. Somebody asks, it's Cataclysm123 asks, is Ahmadinejad alive or dead? According to the Iranians, he's alive. Though quite why the US or Israel saw the need to kill a man who's not been in power for, what, a decade? And he's unlikely to ever be in power ever again. Is quite something. I think by doing that, they were seeking to remove. I think Trump said it in his speech announcing the war. The leadership of they're going to kill everybody in the leadership of Iran, past, present, and future, including Ahmadinejad, who long since fell out of favor in the Iranian system. But again, it just shows to show the limits of these people's thinking. They think that just by killing a lot of people, that will do it. Doesn't work like that. What would the world look like after this war? Asks Dayak O the First. Well, difficult to say. A further diminishing of American power. American power is already diminished over the last 4 years since the beginning of the Russian special military operation, and of course, the ascendancy of China over a lot of foreign trade in the world. What will happen is the West Asian region initially will go through a period of profound instability as it become the question is, will the Americans ever return to that role they had just a few days ago, which saw them be the guarantor, the security guarantor allegedly of all of these comparable states? Will they return to that? Again, depends how the war turns out, but the Iranians will be aiming for them to never return, just as the Russians ultimately are aiming for all the Western European and American troops to leave the old Warsaw Pact nations. Again, that was in the original treaty submitted to NATO and the US over almost 5 years ago now. So that's their aim. Whether they will be able to achieve that aim is another question entirely. At the moment, it seems as if they will be able to. They've succeeded in driving the Americans back. I mean, Trump is now announcing that he's sending some sort of ground force to the region. But again, where's that going to land? Where's it going to go? The Iranians have demonstrated they have the capability to strike all the way across the West Asian region. So what they're going to do with this this ground force that the Trump wants to send in, where's it going to land? What's it going to be other than a big fat target for the Iranians? Again, these people are completely divorced from reality. Trump still thinks he can just land a whole bunch of soldiers somewhere and the Iranians will just immediately drop a missile on them. They're already blasting like whatever potential ground force the US was going to use in Iran to bits via their targeting of Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. The idea being that they disrupt and destroy the potential Kurdish force that was going to be sent against them. Right. T.G. Wilson says the question to ask is what aspect of Israeli expansionism does not benefit US imperialism? Also note that the British and French have already pivoted to the UAE. UAE is very important to them. Is Cuba likely to bear the brunt of any US defeat in the Middle East? If anything, at the moment, it might encourage the Americans to ease up on the blockade. Look, the blockade of the oil blockade of Cuba could be ended very easily. All it would require is essentially the Russians to send an armed escort with that oil tanker, with the oil tankers. That would do it, because what's been revealed again in the war, what the Iranians have revealed is like the Americans haven't got anything that can intercept these Iranian missiles. So how would the Americans then fare in a shooting war with the Russians? Not very well is the obvious answer to that question. And so the Russians need to assert themselves against this. And again, it's not just a matter of asserting themselves against the US's blockade of Cuba, but they've been having their oil tankers targeted by probably the British via their Ukrainian assets repeatedly over the last few months and haven't apparently done much about it. So they're going to need to assert themselves on in the naval theatre of operations, and they could quite easily send an escort with these oil tankers and basically just dare the US to do something. And I will bet now that the US will just quietly let such an oil tanker dock and unload its cargo, and then not say anything about it. That's what I would bet would happen. Trump admitted today to greenlighting Israel attacks, says T.G. Wilson, even provoking it. Yeah, I mean, they confessed what they were doing last week. They said that the Trump administration was thinking that this was going to be easier to carry off if it was actually seen as an Israeli attack, which the US then just happened to join. So this is this is something which was admitted to. This was a deliberate tactic. Nush82 says the Indian bourgeoisie has been busy propagandizing the Indian public with anti-Chinese rhetoric at the behest of the US imperialists for decades now. The Indian bourgeoisie are a truly pathetic creation, but there you go. T.G. Wilson says Iran disrupted Abraham Accord normalization, is anti-trip, pro-petro-yuan, and pursuing BRICS pay initiatives all drive de-dollarization. All reasons why the US was always going to attack them. Okay. Right. So tomorrow we're going to have this special on the role of Israel in the US imperial system, presenting my arguments about it. So be sure to join me for that one. Also, Patreon Q&A tomorrow, time to be announced. So be sure to join me for that if you're on the Patreon side of things. Got another edition of the Decline and Fall show going to be filmed later this week, so keep an eye out for that. But I'm going to draw things to a close for this evening. It's been interesting to answer some of your questions. Going to be doing deeper dives into various different aspects of this war as we go on. I'm going to go deeper on the question of movements of capital in and out of the region as later this week. A lot of interesting things to say there. But until I return to you tomorrow, thanks to everybody who's tuned in tonight. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. I'll be back with you again tomorrow.